rev up your engines. Today I'm going to talk about brake systems on your car. When certain things happen, they tell you it's time to have the brakes fixed. Now the most common problem is the brake pads just wear out. You hit the brakes, you start to hear a noise. Now these brake pads are still pretty good. They're getting thin, but they haven't gotten to the metal backing part. When the pad material wears so thin that it's worn through to the metal backing, you'll hear horrible noises as the metal grinds against the rotor. Now some brake pads have little squealers. They're a little metal rod that comes out. And when your brake pads get thin, that little squealer will hit the rotor and you'll hear it squeaking as you're driving. So when you hear that noise, heck, go to your wheels and check them. See if the brake pads are really thin. It's easy enough to do on many cars like this Lexus. The wheels have holes in them, so you can look inside with a flashlight and see how thick they are. And in this case, they're pretty thick, so you really don't need to change them. But here's the kicker. Let's say you hear them squeaking, but then after a while, the squeaking noise goes away. Well, that little metal squealer can break off. Then you won't hear any noise until the metal gets down to the metal and it's too late. So once you hear that squeaking, it's a good idea to test them and make sure that they're not thin and it's just time to change the pads. That's the cheapest thing to do anyways. Not like anything else, things aren't always that simple. A lot of times car brakes will just squeak because discs are open to the air and the rotors get surface rust because they're steel, and they'll often make little noises now and then, and if you pull them off and you see that, hey, there's plenty of brake pad left and there's nothing dragging and no fluid leaking, a lot of guys will just live with that and realize that as they age, some brakes just make squeaky noises. Now, as a tip to stop squeaking noises, my advice is buy high quality brake pads. I personally found that the Akebono, A-K-E-B-O-N-O, it's a Japanese company, pads are the best. I've had customers that even gouged their rotors with their old pads, but they didn't want to spend much money on their old car because it was a junker. So all I did was put on Akebono pads, and they didn't make any noise at all after that, so they're very good pads. Now the next common thing that goes wrong with brakes is you step on the brake pedal, but it sinks to the floor. Maybe not all the time, but some of the time. Now there's three things that can do that. Two are pretty easy to check out, but the third, the ABS system, is not. So we'll start with the simple one. When you step on the brake pedal, there's a rod that goes through the firewall, and then under the hood of the car, the rod pushes the brake master cylinder that sends pressurized fluid to all the wheels. So the most common reason that you step on your brake pedal and it goes to the floor is that there's a leak in the system somewhere. So first you go to each wheel. You look at the caliper, see if it's wet and it's leaking. It's got a rubber hose. The rubber hose can leak. And then you check each wheel that way to see if there's fluid leaking. Now, brake fluid is clear and it's very slimy, so if you want to make sure it's the right stuff, just get some, put a little on your fingers. You'll see it's real slippery, has a unique odor, and you see that leaking, then you got to fix that leaking area. Now, external leaks are pretty easy to find. You're going to see the area leaking, it'll be all wet, but sometimes the brake master cylinders themselves go bad. But they can go bad like a bad heart valve. It can leak inside itself. You won't see anything leaking. In that case, you really have to take the brake master cylinder off. And if you see that the back side, the seal's wet, it means it's leaking. Or sometimes they just leak internally and they don't make any pressure. In that case, you just get another brake master cylinder and install it. Now, if it's not the master, then it starts to get complicated. It could be the brake booster. Back here is the brake booster. It's what boosts power to give you power brakes. And when the booster goes bad, you can get a pedal that goes to the floor, but here's a classic way of testing it. If the engine is turned off in the car and you step on the brake and it's nice and hard, but then you start up the car, and then hit the brakes and they go to the floor, whoa! That's a great way of testing if the booster's bad. When the car is running and the booster has all its boost pressure and then the pedal sinks, it means that the booster has gone bad. But there is one scenario in modern cars, if your brake sinks to the floor, that can be really complex and expensive to fix, and that's anti-lock braking systems. They're very complex braking systems. You can see the brake pressure that comes to the master cylinder goes to this gigantic solenoid that has valves. It's computer run. The wheels have an ABS sensor that measure how fast the wheels are turning. And the computer reads the speed that the car is going to see if all wheels are stopping at the same speed or if one is stopping less as the other ones. It will modulate how the brakes brake so you don't pull to one side or the other. And then when this system breaks down, you have to have a very complicated computer, like this Launch X431 that I have, the professional mechanics use. We have to analyze the ABS system, check all the actuators, check the speed sensors. And a lot of times, if you're lucky, it will have an ABS code and we'll at least get a generic area where the problem is so we can pinpoint what's wrong and fix it. Needless to say, that's not something you can do at home yourself. But fortunately, in most modern cars, ABS systems are fail-safe systems. So if your ABS system breaks down and your ABS light comes on most cars, it will return to normal non-ABS braking. And you'll be able to stop your car fine. It just won't have anti-lock braking capability. So if one wheel's in water and one's on dry pavement, it's gonna slide around. And I do have to say, a lot of my customers, when I analyze an ABS problem, they find out they need a new modulator, and the modulator's like $1,500. A lot of them will say, well, I'll just live without ABS and just have normal brakes. And even if, say, somebody told you needed a modulator, you can't really replace it yourself, because to bleed the air out of them, you need one of these computers that has various steps that opens and closes the solenoids to get the air out of the system. And if you're putting a new one in, the new one's going to be full of air, and it can be a real job. Even with one of these, sometimes it takes 3 or 4 hours to get all the air out of the system. And my last tip is this, speaking of air in the system. A lot of guys will say, oh, I need to bleed my brakes, I have air in the system. Well, bleeding your brakes, if no work was done on the car, isn't going to really fix anything, because if there's air in the system, there's a reason there's air in the system. Maybe the master cylinder's sucking air, maybe you got a leak in a hose, and when you take your foot off the brake, it sucks air in. But if you do have air in your system, you want to find out why and fix it. Don't think that bleeding it out is going to fix anything by itself. So now you know a little bit more about brakes and when you need to have them looked at and what to do about it so you can drive down the road safely without smashing into people. So if you never want to miss another one of my new car repair videos, remember to ring that bell.